Let's talk a little bit about the city of Thyatira. So, Thyatira is not as important, at least historically, as important of a city as, say, Pergamum or Smyrna or Ephesus. It had been a smaller city, but then it had been built up because of the trade routes. When Pax Romana came through, the trade routes were able to utilize Thyatira. And so Thyatira, being that it was a center of commerce, ends up becoming a center of guilds. And so in order to work, in order to have a job, you had to be in a guild. If you were going to be producing something, if you were a potter, if you were a metal worker, if you were doing any sort of trade, if you were a carpenter, even if you were a merchant, there were guilds. And those guilds became very powerful and very important. And even though the cultic worship wasn't as powerful and wasn't as important, every guild meeting became a center of cultic worship because the guilds had patron gods and goddesses. And so whenever a guild got together, they would also have a time of worship. There would be a worship service. There would be some sort of sacrifice. There would be some sort of rites. There would be something of that sort going on during every guild meeting. And so in order for the Christians to be in a guild, they also then had to worship a god or a goddess. And so you start to see the problem in Thyatira. The problem was you couldn't work if you were a Christian, because if you were a Christian, you wouldn't be part of the guild meetings. You couldn't be a member of the guild without going to the guild meetings, and you wouldn't go to the guild meetings because it was a place of cultic worship. It was a place of sacrifice. It was a place of ritual. And so the struggle that the Christians had in Thyatira was a financial struggle. They were constantly under pressure, under financial pressure by the industries that were there because they were refusing to play by the guild rules. And the guilds ran the place, and so the Christians were in economic straits. And so you start to see why Jezebel becomes powerful, because she is giving the Christians a way out. And so when you think about Thyatira, that's what you need to be thinking about. This was a place where they were being persecuted economically. So they weren't necessarily being persecuted physically. At least there isn't a lot of evidence of that for this time period right here. But they were being persecuted economically. And if you're going to be a Christian in this world, you have to be ready, not just for physical persecution, but you have to be ready for economic persecution. To lose your job, to lose your place, to lose your situation, to lose your savings, to lose those things. Because the Christians in Thyatira are actually being commended by Christ. Because even in the midst of that, they were still rising above. They were growing in their acts of love and of service, regardless of how much money they had. So those are some things to think about when we think about Thyatira. It was a city of guilds, but then because of those guilds, it was a city of cultic worship. And because the guilds were connected to that cultic worship, it was a city of economic persecution. Thank you.